Hello again, and thank you for watching our show. By now, most of you know I'm Harry Greenbeger. I'm the president of the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association and the host for this program which you're watching. And today I want you to meet our special guest, a young man whose name is David Campbell. David is a graduate student at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. And David, first I'm just going to ask you to tell us something about your personal background, and then we'll talk about projects of special interest to both you and to me.
Okay. I've had people say forever that I should write a book about my own life, and I've never stopped enough to consider doing that. I guess I feel like if I ever did that, it would cease being interesting or fun. But I'm from New Orleans originally, and my dad worked for an oil company, an oil engineering firm named McDermott. And when I was 6 years old, we moved to the Middle East. And we lived 3 years in Dubai, and then we moved to Brussels, Belgium. And so I lived for 8 years in Europe, and became a humongous sponge of military history. We lived in this town of Waterloo, Belgium. You could see the monument from our house where Napoleon was defeated. We had a German bunker in our neighborhood we used to play guns in, and every February we would ski. Our church would go skiing on the mountain of Obersalzberg in Bavaria, where Hitler's house was. And the hotel was the headquarters for his personal bodyguard, just above the mountain.
You were exposed to all of this as a very young person. Absolutely.
My formative years, when people say, where are you from, it's always a misnomer, and I have friends that try to say, you're from here, but where I was raised was overseas, and that's always been home to me. And I came back to the States. We moved back in my senior year of high school, which was brutal beyond words. My mother's from Central Louisiana, and we would come home every summer, and 2 weeks before we went back for my senior year of high school, my mother said, we're not going back. So that was a culture shock of the highest order, and I just crawled through that senior year and got my tail end back to New Orleans as soon as I was done. I didn't even stay for high school graduation, got back to New Orleans, and I grew up in a very religious family. I've definitely, we'll discuss this later, have knocks with religion without a doubt, but growing up in Europe, we had a great community at our church there. We had people from all over the world. We had political refugees from Africa. It was humane, as this organization would aspire to be. And so I learned a lot from that. But back in the United States, I then got involved, I joined the United States Marine Corps. And before I joined the Marine Corps, I had felt this calling to go to seminary. But I joined the Marine Corps and went through basic training. Then the next summer I went through officer candidate school. I was in the reserves. And I graduated in the top 5% of my class and was on full scholarship, one of two in the United States to get this scholarship from the Marine Corps. And I started going to Tulane University. And the wheels came off the bus in a pretty rapid fashion. I started taking classes on U.S. foreign policy in Latin America and all these things that I was raised in a very black and white world to view on America and politics and religion and all that. And at Tulane, I started to see where this didn't fit.
Black and white world?
Just that we are a Christian nation and God, and it's in my father's world. It's very simple. Very clear.
So when you were talking about this black and white view, you're talking about religion as opposed to non-religion. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I guess you could say just a very simplified view on.
But now those years that you spent abroad, I assume you went to English language schools.
Yes, and we were probably 40–50% American. Lots of Japanese, lots of Swedes. The Swedes were great.
And your family, friends, and associates were English-speaking people, I presume.
We had cheerleaders. We had an American football team. We had there are a lot of Americans in Belgium. In Brussels, we actually had 2 international schools, and we had a lot of.
You essentially had an American education, even though you were overseas. I'm just trying to see what your background did for you.
Yes, in fact, it was great because it was Pan-American, not necessarily Mexico and Canada, but I had some Canadian friends, but I had friends from all over the United States. So I got a great exposure to America as friends from New York. We had Southerners in the oil business, so Texas and Louisiana, but we had people from California, New York, Florida, Michigan, just all over the United States, and then we had all these people from around the world as well. So it was a fascinating way to grow up.
And when you were in like exotic places like Dubai, your family went to church. There were Christian churches.
We met at our school. We met at the school in the gymnasium because that was it wasn't as progressive back then in Dubai. So I remember growing up, and that was something else too that I thought was fascinating. I was liking Dubai to growing up in a Dr. Seuss book. because I was there from 1st through 3rd grade, and you would have the minarets and the call to prayer and these cars and the souks, the smells, and I was just blown away by it. I thought it was so fascinating. I loved it.
In other words, you were impressed by it.
I thought it was fantastic. It was really.
Then when you went to Europe as opposed to the Middle East, there were conventional churches, but you and your family were regular church goers?
There was an International Baptist Church in downtown Brussels that we attended, which had been a converted house. And so we were there, and it was quite a big community. We had and again, with just the human side of it, we had a lot of political refugees that were facing deportation back to Africa and facing prison and execution. And so we would provide for them and things. So my upbringing with the church outside of the South was quite positive in terms of what I saw, until I started to see some of these things with theology and doctrine and all that. But it wasn't really till I got back to the United States, started to see the American church, and then more than that, just started to put all that together with how it was exercised in real life versus what these teachings were that I had read. So.
However, when you returned to the United States, you mentioned that you also went to a seminary?
I did. It's quite a long story. The shorter version is that I left the Marine Corps with a ton of questions about, including religion. It was like these two currents that were in my life: military history and that fascination, and my faith in God and this belief. And the two of them completely split me in half. And I never have been able to since really reconcile one with the other. And that was before I really got into enough science to where that really kind of put the nails in the coffin on a lot of whatever belief I had before.
Well, what you just said is going to be a lead into what we're going to discuss as your real, genuine present interest.
Oh, and the final thing on that is that that's when I began working under Stephen Ambrose, and that's kind of when I got the pieces put back together in terms of history and just in terms of a political science view on America, and I ended up working under him, and it was great. I was under a phenomenal professor who just encouraged me to think and ask questions.
I think most of the people in our audience know who Stephen Ambrose is, but fill us in a little bit about what he did. Well,
the best thing I could ever describe about meeting him was I had him for a World War II class, and this is, again, when my world had just crumbled to pieces, and I just didn't know what I believed anymore. I was in the Republican Party and all these things, and I walked away from so much of that and just had all these questions, and I did not have a home anywhere. I kind of bounced a little to the left and thought they had their own versions of extremism, and so I was somewhere in the middle. But I took a class at UNO under Steve, and later he wasn't always there because Steve was such a great writer, and he was always busy with these obligations. He taught maybe 40% of this class, and he co-taught it with another professor. So he had written some book about Eisenhower and the treatment of the German prisoners of war in World War II, and in my arrogance and idealism, I kind of figured that wasn't as important a subject as it could have been. So I wrote something in the school newspaper saying that it's a shame that this system of publication and tenure is taking away great teachers from teaching in the classroom. So I wrote this article, not thinking of it, and then I was sitting at my desk, and the door gets knocked open. "Where's this David Campbell?" And it was Steve Ambrose.
Yes.
So he said, "Come on, we're going for a walk." And so off we went. And then he talked to me about this story and all this, and we became really close, and then I became his last teaching assistant. And then after working for the House of Blues for a bit, after he had retired, I got a chance to work for him as his personal manager, and so I went to Montana, worked for him there, and then in Bay St. Louis, and he had an accident, was way behind on his book writing obligations and things, so he wrote a letter of recommendation for me to go to work for HBO for Tom Hanks on the show Band of Brothers. So I got to work, which I did, and I got to meet these heroes of my youth, all these guys. I never really had a grandfather, so it was great to get to know these veterans.
You did have a grandfather, you just didn't know your grandfather.
Oh yes,
we all had,
yes, well said, well said.
But now,
and then I ended up going to seminary after kind of not wanting to deal with that. I played with law, but this was always there, and I finally said, I've got to go down in the basement and find out if the boogeyman's there. This is just, it's gone on too long, so I went, and my first day of theology class, my head was like, no way. This is just, and I literally, for the rest of that semester, felt like I was trying to hold my head underwater.
That was a Baptist seminary?
Presbyterian, Reformed Theological Seminary. And actually, my professors and I had great conversations. But a lot of the student body, I just could not even begin to mesh with. And later, after class, many of them would say, those were great questions, but I was completely on my own. And I didn't go there to be the black sheep. I went there saying, hey, we're all seeking truth, right? I mean, this is what this is all about. And I've kind of come to believe that a lot of my Christian brothers and sisters want to they seek tradition, I think, over truth, because if